with Yuzuha making her debut in ZenlessZoneZero as the game's first ever physical support in version 2.1, players have many questions that they want answered. Is she better than Astra Yao? Should I pull for a MIYABI instead of her? And why is my bank calling again? As a result, in today's video, we'll be covering everything you need to know about Yuzuha's release, from how her abilities work to the best ways to build her. But if you learned something or enjoyed today's video, like, comment, and subscribe. But without further ado though, let's break down everything you need to know about Yuzuha and her potential teams. Yuzuha's kit is simple and effective. You use her EX Special, Chain, and Ultimate whenever they're available to build sugar points, and this will fuel her off-field aftershock attacks. These skills also apply the Sweet Scare mark, letting Yuzuha match her attribute anomaly to an ally's, and this will improve overall anomaly application for a specific element. Now, each time she uses her EX Special or Ultimate, she grants a team-wide attack buff that also gives affected allies a 15% damage boost, but overall, Yuzuha's role is to maintain buffs, apply debuffs, and accelerate anomaly application for the team. Now let's quickly break down Yuzuha's kit. Sugar points are Yuzuha's special resource, and when Yuzuha enters the battlefield, she gains 3 of them. She can also hold up to a total of 6 points total, and when Yuzuha has said resource, her allies who attack will then trigger basic attack, hard candy shot against surrounding enemies. When this attack lands a heavy hit, Yuzuha will consume 1 sugar point. Now, Yuzuha also has a unique mechanic known as Sweet Scare, which lasts for 40 seconds and can be refreshed by using her EX Special or Ultimate and hitting an enemy with either ability. When an enemy affected by Sweet Scare is hit by an enemy using an attack of their own attribute, it then triggers Flavor Match, which causes Yuzuha's basic attacks to match that attribute when targeting an enemy. Reapplying Sweet Scare can then remove the existing Flavor Match, which consequently allows it to be triggered again with a different attribute should you choose. This is important because this means that you can control what anomalies you apply, and this will allow you to freeze, assault, or even burn enemies quicker. But as an important note, Sweet Scare sometimes applied anomalies too quickly, which felt awkward since the cooldowns for Disorder and anomaly triggers didn't always line up properly, and as a result, there were moments where the main anomaly agent had to stall and wait for the cooldown timer to reset before they could begin applying anomalies again. Yuzuha's core passive, Whimsical Wonder, is what grants her the 3 sugar points upon entering battle, and whenever Yuzuha inflicts Sweet Scare on an enemy, the entire squad receives an attack bonus equal to 40% of Yuzuha's initial attack, capped at a total of 1200, along with a 15% damage boost for all squad members. These effects will last for 40 seconds, and triggering the passive again will obviously refresh the duration, but if Yuzuha's initial attack reaches 3000, the squad gains the full attack bonus automatically, so that'll be one of the stat lines that Yuzuha needs to prioritize when it comes to her build. Her additional ability activates when another squad member is either an anomaly character or shares Yuzuha's faction, and with this, whenever she inflicts Sweet Scare, and if her anomaly mastery exceeds 100, each point above 100 increases the squad's anomaly buildup rate by 0.2% up to a maximum of 20%. It also boosts the squad's attribute anomaly damage and disorder damage by 0.2%, also up to 20%, and these effects will last for 40 seconds and refresh upon reactivation. Now, if Yuzuha's anomaly mastery reaches 200, she grants the full benefit of this effect to the squad. However, as we'll see in the build section, reaching 200 anomaly mastery is not as easy as you'd think. As a result, not capping this effect is fine, especially if you don't have her signature. Now let's move on to Yuzuha's basic attacks. Her general basic attack unleashes up to 5 strikes, dealing physical damage, and if held, she can then enter a defensive stance for 1.5 seconds. If she's hit during this defensive stance, her parry will then deal decent damage alongside daze, but as a side note, performing this parry will also give her a sugar point. However, using her basic is pretty uncommon, even if she's able to get 1 sugar point from using it. Now, technically, it's not entirely accurate to say Yuzuha's basic attacks aren't used, because her off-field aftershock attacks, known as hard candy shot, is used pretty frequently. As explained with Sweet Scare, candy shot is the skill that applies anomaly from off-field, and while it does consume sugar points, it stands out for 2 other major reasons. First, it applies anomalies and can change element, and second, its anomaly application does not affect the matching anomalies damage calculation. In simple terms, this means that Yuzuha can help progress anomaly buildup more efficiently, even without weakening the disorder/anomaly damage regardless of her anomaly proficiency. Yuzuha's EX Special, Cavity Alert, can be activated to throw a bomb at enemies, dealing physical damage, and if the attack lands as a heavy hit, it will then inflict the Sweet Scare state. This skill also restores 2 sugar points upon use, and can trigger a quick assist on hit. If the skill is used after a quick assist or a dodge counter, Yuzuha will then use a different version of her EX Special, but ultimately ultimately the end goal and impact of the ability is still the same. Now let's talk about Yuzuha's various different assists. The most notable here is the defensive assist, as it recovers 1 additional sugar point, but otherwise these assists are pretty standard. They deal a decent amount of daze, generate an okay amount of anomaly, and otherwise it should just be used whenever Yuzuha parries, though that should not always be common. Yuzuha's chain attack delivers a powerful strike to enemies in a small area, but unlike with most other non-DPS agents, using Yuzuha's chain is valuable since it provides you with 1 sugar point, also automatically triggers a quick assist immediately after. Though this is primarily good for the sugar points, the chain attack does contribute towards her building decibels, so it's certainly a decent option, unlike something like a stunner's chain. Yuzuha's ultimate is a powerful strike that hits enemies in a wide range around her, dealing significant physical damage, but damage aside, enemies struck by a heavy attack during this move are once again inflicted with the sweet scare state. Activating this skill also grants 25 energy to all other squad members, as this is a supportive ultimate, but uniquely this also restores 2 sugar points and prompts a quick assist just like her EX special. Before we get into the team section though, let's quickly go over the format of this testing one more time. As always, the goal here was to have all primary DPS's additional abilities active, as without them, many here would lose significant damage. That said, I did still test some teams with DPS who didn't have them. To this end, I will admit that some teams have performed much better than others, but this again was mostly due to the boss buff being super strong, or a character like MIYABI just being strong regardless of where you pick her. Now for most non-DPS games, their additional abilities were lower priority, so support, defense agents, or even sometimes stunner were used without their additional abilities. Next though, I have an even more brief disclaimer, and that's the fact that the following teams had M6 on A ranks, M0 on S ranks, and otherwise the signature W engines or ideal options for every character. As a final reminder though, these findings will always require context because things like the encounter, the boss, their buffs, and other factors can affect these results. You've been warned. With the new Deadly Assault boss on the way, there were also a few things that I noticed during testing. When I tried multiple team compositions, the boss's damage patterns and mechanics felt way more unique than usual, so keep that in mind when you're fighting them. It also reminded me a lot of Pompey, especially with its unskippable transition that just couldn't be optimized. On top of this, the boss is immune to frozen, meaning mono ice MIYABI teams won't be able to rely on her usual crowd control. But that said, despite these limitations, MIYABI still remains the best ice option available, and several other Deadly Assault bosses continue to be weak to ice, keeping her relevant overall. Now let's start with some of the double anomaly teams I tested with Yuzuha, starting with Deadly Assault scores, since that's the most important metric here. The team of Yuzuha, Vivian, and Yanagi stood out as one of the highest Deadly Assault scoring teams among all double anomaly teams that I tested, and ranked 3rd overall, even when including non-anomaly comps. In terms of clear speed, it was around 25% slower than the fastest team, but the score did more than happily make up for this. Therefore, the team of Yuzuha, Jane, and Vivian not only had a strong score, they also ended up being the fastest team overall. Now to be clear, it was easily the most well-rounded and efficient comp that I tried, but another team that I tested was Yuzuha, Vivian, and Piper, which was roughly about 40% slower than the Jane team, but still achieves a respectable Deadly Assault score, making it a viable option. For players looking for a more free-to-play friendly anomaly team, characters like Piper or Grace are solid alternatives, but just keep in mind that there aren't too many free anomaly characters that feel quite as good. For MIYABI teams in general, they all performed great to nobody's surprise. But with this said, MIYABI is easily the strongest anomaly DPS in the game right now. Now, although she doesn't necessarily gain the most benefit from an anomaly damage buff, adding the disorder damage, attack increase, and potential anomaly buildup rate pairs amazingly with her. Despite this, I had originally expected MIYABI to still lack in performance as the buffs are more pure anomaly focused, but surprisingly, this synergy did end up translating into perfect clear times and pretty high scores in Deadly Assault. Now, unsurprisingly, the best MIYABI team was MIYABI, Vivian, and Yuzuha, but this was surprising not just because of MIYABI's own damage, but rather the amount of anomalies and total damage from disorders. To my second surprise, this team also outperformed other MIYABI setups by around 8 to 10% on average, and also scored the highest overall in Deadly Assault. Now to be clear, this was ahead of other teams like MIYABI, Yanagi, Yuzuha, MIYABI, Sokaku Yuzuha, or even MIYABI, Bernice Yuzuha. Moving past this, I also tested other support-based MIYABI teams, and this included teams like Sokaku or Astra for the 3rd slot. And while these lineups ended up performing about 10% worse than the anomaly-based version, they still head up fairly well depending on your setup, at the cost of sometimes having more limiteds though. The last team I want to highlight is Yuzuha, Yanagi, and MIYABI, and while this lineup did lose out in other factors to Vivian, it was still about 18% faster than the rest of the teams, and also managed to rank 2nd 2nd overall in terms of deadly assault scores. Now in terms of overall best teams, the best were obviously MIYABI based ones, with Yanagi or Vivian performing immediately after, depending on the boss fight. But for non-MIYABI related teams, Ishuen, Jufufu, Yuzuha, Piper, Vivian, Yuzuha, Hugo, Lighter, Yuzuha, and Ishuen, Astra, Yuzuha were all the best non-MIYABI related lineups. But as a side note, for those of you still curious about Yuzuha as an attack agent buffer, she is still a respectable damage percent and attack increase buffer, so she did still offer decent value to teams, especially if they didn't have Astra. That said, once Astra and Yuzuha were both shown to share damage percent and attack percent to their allies, Astra immediately found amazing value by offering more consistent quick assists, and by contrast, Yuzuha's synergy felt lacking, though she did end up helping certain characters like Nekomata with her additional ability. Now on the topic of Astra, however, let's now break down each support. When comparing Yuzuha to Astra in anomaly focused teams, Yuzuha generally performs between 5 and 20% better, with the average landing around 10%. However, outside of anomaly teams like with attack or rupture agents, Astra still remains the stronger option overall. That said, Yuzuha's value in anomaly teams goes even further, as it offers even greater advantages in certain team comps. For example, certain anomaly agents can instead gain great value from swapping from anomaly mastery to attack percent on her 6th slot, and this is especially true for someone who's like Vivian and are busy with their gameplay goals. In these cases, the value Yuzuha brings is even more significant and absolutely outperforms Astra by comparison. In terms of pre-farm, you'll need 3,705,000 dennies. You'll also need 300 senior investigation logs to upgrade them. You'll also need 250 specialized physical chips, 75 advanced physical chips, 25 basic physical chips, 30 ruler support certification seals, 32 advanced support seals, 4 basic seals, 5 campster cage passes, 9 of a new expert challenge resource, and finally 60 higher dimensional datas, 9 materials from the new notorious hunt, and 60 higher dimensional datas from the new expert challenge. Now let's talk about W engines for Yuzuha and how they perform. Starting with her signature W engine, it's easily her best in slot choice to, again, no one's surprise, and this increases the equipper's anomaly mastery for 40 seconds, and if their aftershock hits an enemy, all squad members will then gain 60 anomaly proficiency for 40 seconds, with the requirement being that you need to do physical damage with your EX special or ultimate. For Yuzuha, a passive like this is super easy to maintain, but what's more important here though is the anomaly mastery boost if you have this engine's passive. While Yuzuha's additional ability doesn't seem to require too much anomaly mastery, hitting the 200 threshold is actually quite difficult. The only real source of getting this stat are the 2-piece Phaethon's Melody set, a 6-slot anomaly mastery disc, and select W engines, making this choice even more difficult than you'd expect. In fact, even with all pieces mentioned, Yuzuha only just barely reaches 201 anomaly mastery, making it deceptively hard to actually max out. That said, much like their agents such as Jufufu or Astra, hitting the exact cap is not necessarily the end all be all, though it does feel nice to get it. In testing and calculations though, Yuzuha's signature also outperformed its alternatives by a decent amount and was 5% stronger than Kaboom the Cannon and roughly 7% better than Weeping Cradle. On the topic of Kaboom the Cannon though, this will trade off some of the anomaly focused support from her signature in exchange for a 10% in combat attack buff. This makes it a good fit when you're just looking to add damage to a team, but it's also worth mentioning that you do lose a bit of energy regeneration and anomaly scaling in general. Finally, there's Weeping Cradle, the technically free to play but technically also pay to win option, and this offers a reliable debuff, utility, and performances overall, but it lacks the same level of damage and stat helping that her signature brings. So if you wanted the best possible setup for Yuzuha, especially in anomaly teams, her signature is the way to go, but otherwise Kaboom fits well in general DPS builds. Weeping Cradle is decent as well as a free-to-play / technically budget option, but otherwise just stick to the standard. Now let's talk about disk drive sets for Yuzuha. Swing Jazz ended up being the most consistent all-around option thanks to the 15% team-wide damage boost it provides, and overall it's a solid general use set and fits well in most team compositions. Then there's Astra Voice, which has strong utility but is harder to maintain since it requires 60 energy to activate, so you'll need to manage her energy carefully, though in most cases you won't actually even be able to keep all stacks active. Freedom Blues is another amazing choice for Yuzuha, but it is restricted to being used exclusively alongside a physical DPS. As a result, if you aren't using Jane, Piper, or Alice once she releases, this is definitely a set that you should pass on. Lastly, there's Protopunk, which doesn't hit quite as hard as the others, but is much easier to activate. This makes it a good pick for more accessible or less optimized builds, and the reason for this is because anyone on the team can perform an assist to then activate its passive. As a result, especially if other sets like Astra Voice or Swing Jazz are in use, this set is worth considering. Now regarding her 2-piece set, Phaethon's Melody is basically basically a non-negotiable, as it's extremely important for helping Yuzuha with her anomaly mastery threshold on her additional ability. Now for her stat breakpoints, Yuzuha really needs 3000 attack to activate her team-wide attack buff from her core passive. She'll need 200 anomaly mastery to trigger the full effect of her additional ability. However, on her own, she caps out at around 171 anomaly mastery. This is where you'll need to use something like the Mark II engine or even her signature if you want to reach the 200/201 threshold. It really just depends. Now let's break down the pros and cons. For pros, she's easy to play, she's the best anomaly support, it's pretty easy to hit 3000 attack, and alongside this, her design is fantastic, alongside also having a summer outfit. Now in terms of cons, if you really like her design, she doesn't really stay on field for nearly as long as other characters, and to add to this, she doesn't really buff attack/rupture agents nearly as well. Finally, Yuzuha can sometimes feel awkward to play, as she generates so much anomaly mastery and application at times that it feels like she ends up fighting against the anomaly cooldowns rather than the timer of the enemies themselves. But finally guys, when weighing the pros and cons of pulling for Yuzuha, she offers obviously a lot of strong incentives, especially for characters who are focused on anomaly teams. With this, she's easy to play, as one of the best supports, and we've been really waiting for a character like this. But as always, through her stats, the unique way that you build her, alongside her utility, I believe that she's definitely a character that can be worth it, especially if you find yourself using characters like Astra for more than one content. Anyways though guys, to be clear, I will be pulling for Yuzuha, but you don't necessarily need to. However, in general, you should not use my takes or my words as the end all be all. That said though, if you want to pull, feel free to do so. It's completely up to you. Thanks again for watching though guys. Hope you enjoyed or learned something from today's video. And as always, I'll see you in the next one. Stay safe, stay healthy. Good night.